Amazing. Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Hi.
All right. So I know about 100-ish people RSVP to this, and we have 28 currently. So we're going to give just a few minutes before we get into, proper questions, but we're here with Shelley Parker-Chan. Everyone say hello, say
Hi.
hi.
So nice to see you all. Thanks for coming.
Yes. So as a bit of background on Sapph-Lit, we vote every single month on two books to read. We vote on a fiction book and a nonfiction book. And as I mentioned before everyone hopped on, we have only been around for about 4 months. I started Sapph-Lit back in May, and it's grown so quickly thanks to platforms like TikTok and Instagram promoting the club. So our third month in August, we voted on She Who Became the Sun as our fiction pick. And I have my copy right here with all the little rainbow tabs. I was so excited to read this book. I love fantasy. I love feminist retellings of mythology and history. So that's definitely going to be part of our discussion. But I also know that this is your first book, and I definitely want to hear about that as well. So I'm going to give a quick introduction to everyone on the call for who you are. And this is just taken from your website. So this is all this information that is out there. But this is Shelley Parker-Chan.
Read the short one.
Very short. This is Shelley Parker-Chan. They are an Asian Australian former diplomat and international development advisor who spent nearly a decade working on human rights, gender equality, and LGBT rights in Southeast Asia, named after the Romantic poet. She was raised on a steady diet of Greek myths, Arthurian legend, and Chinese tales of suffering and tragic romance. Her debut novel, She Who Became the Sun, owes more than a little to all three. In 2017, she was awarded an otherwise Tiptree Fellowship for work of speculative narrative that expands our understanding of gender. She currently lives in Melbourne, Australia. So thank you for making the time difference work with meeting our little book club.
Thanks so much for having me. It's always a real privilege to be at these kind of things, the book clubs, and see everyone and hear about your experiences with the book. So thanks.
Yeah. So this is, of course, your debut novel, and I'd love to, well, first of all, congratulations. That's incredible and has always been a dream of mine to publish. And I know it's a dream of so many people on this call to do the same. So how are you feeling? Like, can you talk a little bit about that experience and the book has been out for about a month now. So how's that before and after publishing date been?
Man, it's been such a long journey. Like, you can't even believe how long. The germ of this book came about exactly 10 years ago, like at a dinner party when I was with friends, and we're like, oh, we can't find the books we want to read. Like, damn it, let's write our own books. And little did we know how long that would take. 2011 to 2021 is, it's a long grind. Honestly, didn't think I'd see the end of it. Thought I'd be self-publishing. I just didn't think there'd be a market for this kind of book, queer book, Asian book. Didn't kind of fit into a genre. It's been a dream come true for sure. But really long. Like, even between sale and publication was, I think, 2 years and 3 months. Not that I'm counting it. That's a really long time to, have had a book finished, and then you just sit there going, one day people will read it.
Mm-hmm.
And then it came out, and I've just been like blown away by the number of people who've like written to me and said, oh, I didn't like fully understand these gender feelings I was having, and then I kind of saw it reflected in your book in a weird kind of way, maybe not even precisely, but just like a little slice of their own reality reflected in the book. And that's been really special, because that's why I wanted to write it. I didn't think it was going to be published. I was like, I'm just going to throw all my feelings, my gender feelings, into a book and just see what happens. And the fact that even mainstream people have been reading it, like occasionally I'll get like cis men who write to me and be like, I really like your book. And, you know, at the start, I'd just been like, please don't read my book. It's not for you. You're not going to get it. And my partner told me, he's like, "Oh, you should really give them a chance. You know, maybe like they're more broad-minded than you think." So it's actually been quite exciting to think that it's reaching people I didn't think um, it would. And that they've even said, I wouldn't normally read this kind of book, but I like the adventure. So I came along for the adventure and the action. And then I saw some gender stuff. And what do you know? I kind of like thought about it. So yeah, it's been great.
I love that. I love that you're kind of sneaking gender fuckery and gender dialogue into a very violent military historical tale. You're definitely like making some of those cis men think a little bit more.
It's
um,
like spinach and the brownies for sure.
oh my gosh, exactly. So last month, our book that we read for fiction was The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. And as soon as I picked this book up, I noticed at the very bottom, Samantha Shannon is quoted on the US cover. And we had the same kind of conversation, same Zoom chat with her last month. And when I mentioned that we were going to be speaking to you, she got so excited. And I said, what do I have to ask Shelley? Like, you read the book, you obviously loved it, you're quoted on it. And she was most interested in hearing about your research process for this book. And I know that it's so based in history, of course, with a twist, but I'd love to hear about any travel that you did, any books that you read, or anything that you discovered in that research process.
Samantha's such a wonderful person. She has so much energy for supporting debuts. It's like astonishing. I don't know how she does it. I'm so grateful to her for reading it. Yeah, the research. I am not a systematic researcher, and I have so much respect and just appreciation for people who take that like academic approach to researching their fiction, and it really comes through often. Me, not so much. And I always said from the start, you know, I'm only aiming for it to be as historically accurate as like your average low budget Chinese TV drama. Like, please imagine everyone's wearing polyester and has like a wig and everything just looks pretty. It's really all about the aesthetics, to be honest, rather than historical accuracy, which is not to say I did not research things like underwear in the 14th century. And I went down a lot of Wikipedia holes. I think I did read some academic papers. I even paid. Oh, do you know how expensive academic papers are? It is terrible. So I did get one on like Mongol clothes of the 13th century. Um, my approach is like quite magpie-like. I think I just like read stuff that catches my eye, that I feel in the mood for reading. So I did like hit up the university libraries early on and read some stuff about the period, like gender in Imperial China. But I didn't take notes. I just kind of like let it all seep in. And then because this was such a long process, you know, I had the luxury over years of, you know, I'd go to museums on my like weekends off or whatever. And I lived in Asia. So obviously all the Asian museums were like just at my fingertips. So I went to Taiwan, Singapore, Malaysia. They all have amazing collections, and Taiwan especially. So you can just kind of soak in the art. You can just like look at the things. And that plus watching a lot of Chinese dramas, you kind of start to form like a mental image of, you know, what that era is like.
Yeah.
Um, and then like I'm very like what if kind of inspired. So when I read like about the historical period, I would sometimes like fixate on just a little fact or something that's fun to me. Like, you know, there was this guy who was half Chinese, half Mongol, and, you know, on the battlefield his Chinese enemies would totally taunt him by like calling him like Chinese nicknames and baby names, and he's like, I'm a Mongol warrior, how dare you. And I was just like, you know, lol, that's like fun to me. So like I grabbed him and like made him a character and stuff like that.
I
So just
love
looking for inspiration.
I love the insults that were thrown back between the characters. It just felt so historically funny. Like I found myself laughing a lot throughout reading the book. It was like burn. No, it's also really great that you mentioned the Chinese historical dramas, because my pandemic experience started with binging The Untamed on Netflix. And I just saw so much parallel between your book and that TV show because, you know, The Untamed is, of course, based on MLM gay novel. And yeah, I love that connection. And I definitely saw a little bit there.
Yeah, they're like the same genre, you know, the BL Chinese dramas. The Untamed didn't come out till like I'd already almost finished the book, but like they all come from that same place of like the web novels. So this book's, yeah, really based on Chinese web novels as well. And they all have that kind of like big feel, tragic romance, you know, everything's very epic.
Do you have a favorite that you would recommend the Sapphic Book Club to take a rabbit hole down?
I do have some favorites. They're not Sapphic. They're definitely BL for sure. I think one of my favorite web novels is maybe Guardian by Priest. So Priest has done, I think a few have been adapted. Priest did Word of Honor? Did Priest do Word of Honor? I think, yeah. So Word of Honor is the new Untamed. She writes, I don't know, they're just really like fantastic to me. So Guardian is, it's like set up like a cop procedural, he's a detective and there's this really buttoned up professor at the university and they have to like collaborate to solve crimes, and it turns out the crimes are supernatural. And then the professor, the mild-mannered professor who's all buttoned up and very like prim and proper, is of course like the superpowered king of hell, who's like, you know, this badass guy who is the ultimate arbitrator of supernatural crimes on Earth. So he's really badass, like ultimately competent. It's extremely catnippy. And the cop turns out to be a reincarnation of his the god who was his one true love, who made him the king of hell. So it's all very like, it's super epic and like spans millennia, you know.
Oh my gosh, I love that. No, I'm definitely going to look that up after this call. And then I wanted to ask you about on the author flap of the dust jacket for the US cover, it mentions that you are grateful to never have to travel by leaky boat again. Can you tell us that story?
Oh no. Why did that make it in? Now people ask me and I don't actually have a funny story. I just hate boats. And living in Southeast Asia, in an archipelago, in traveling to places like for various like projects like the Solomon Islands. The Solomon Islands was the place that really cemented my boat trauma. And there's nothing special. Like I think Jared Diamond or someone like that had some story about being in Indonesia or like Papua, and like he was sailing from one island to another. His boat literally started sinking and he was like, we are going to die. So it's nothing like that. It's just merely I get really seasick, and if you're in like a little tin can boat and it's banging over these enormous waves, I just like puke everywhere. It's just disgusting and I hate it. And ferries in Southeast Asia also, like, yeah, leaving a little to be desired. It's not like a luxurious ferry experience. It's like you're on the deck and there's like several hundred people and the toilets are revolting, and it's just like, I'm done.
Well, that's why there were never really any boats in She Who Became the Sun. You didn't have to put those in there.
But the sequel is all about boats. Oh my God.
Oh my
God. We're gonna have not yet written someone who's seasick.
Soon. No, I'm expecting it in the second one now. So now we can kind of get into, you know, the book and the plot and the themes and the characters. And the one that stuck out to me most, that made me think the most, was the concept of fate, which is of course interwoven throughout the entire story. And I grew up reading, you know, Percy Jackson. I now read so many feminist retellings of Greek mythology. That's really, you know, what drew me to read this book, was the retelling aspect. But in Greek mythology, fate is something that you don't have any control over. And, you know, they're the fates and they're kind of puppeteering everyone around, snipping everyone's lives away. And if you try and do anything to get away from your fate, it only brings you closer to that inevitable. Whereas I feel like in She Who Became the Sun, Chu and Ouyang were constantly working tirelessly to achieve their fate. And it didn't feel inevitable. It felt like something that could be snatched away at any time. So I'm not sure if this is something that is a concept in Chinese mythology or any Asian mythology, but can you discuss how you see fate, how the characters see fate, how it's different from Greek mythology?
Yeah, I love the concept of fate in Greek mythology, the ultimate tragedy of it. Like, yeah, who doesn't love the story of like Oedipus and stuff like that? Uh yeah, in Chinese mythology, like there are some famous stories that talk about the unalterable nature of your fate and it's sort of woven in the shape of the universe. And I think that structures a lot of, especially like reincarnation stories and that belief in reincarnation. Like you come into the world and already you're sort of like shaped by what you've done previously. And in a way, the pattern of your life going forward has been sort of like already woven, like shaped, and then you sort of go through it. In terms of personal agency, yeah, I don't know. So the original story is, well, the one of the most famous stories is about like the red thread of fate, where, you know, there's this guy, let's see, he's like a prince. And there's several versions, but he's like a prince. He's wandering through the forest or something. Or he's been told he'll marry this person he sees. And like he sees this person, she's like a little peasant girl. He's like, no way am I marrying some little peasant girl. So he orders his servant or whatever to like kill the child. And I think doesn't actually like kill her, but he like horrifically disfigures and blinds her or something. But then like many years later, as the story has wended its way around, this little blinded peasant girl has been lifted up and does become like a princess and like get married. I'm telling this really badly. I actually don't remember it fully well. But the idea is that like, you know, the circle has come around. Like the person he marries is the person he horrifically disfigured. And actually, now that I think about it, like the message is not great. It's kind of like you reap what you sow, you know, a bit ableist there. It's terrible. But at the same time, like you can't fuck with fate. You know, the old man in the moon who writes in his book of fate, you know, has laid it all down and you cannot trick your way. But at the same time, I feel like there are also some counter stories where some people have like tricked the old man with his book Under the Moon, and somehow kind of rewritten parts of their story. And I cannot think of like the specific folk tales. And I'm not like a folk tale person. Like this book is not a folk tale retelling, I guess. This is just in the culture floating around. So I guess it's what informed this book. And like the trickster figure is quite prominent in a lot of Asian mythology and stories. And like Ju is kind of a trickster figure. Like that was her archetype that I was kind of like drawing on at the start to create her character. So, you know, I wanted her to, yeah, to cheat fate. And it's like playing with that chosen one trope.
Yeah.
So the whole book is like dealing with that. The Confucian patriarchy was like really what I wanted to engage with, because the whole story of Zhu Yuanzhang, the emperor, like he is the ultimate self-made man. Like he, you know, was a peasant. He became the emperor. The emperor is the center of the world. He's like the focal point of that entire structure of the Confucian patriarchy. It's like literally the son of heaven. Mm. Yeah, and so the idea that there was a boy who was the chosen one, and like the chosen one would never have been a girl. So I wanted that whole like, well, I didn't get to be the chosen one, but I'm going to take it and screw you. And I guess like the whole Chinese culture, you know, fate intertwines with the Confucian patriarchal like ideals of like, this is how the world should be. So it's a bit of a like, screw you. Like the whole culture is saying what the proper order of the world is, and I wanted to break that. So yeah, in a way my book is not an authentic, well, it's not like a straight up representation of, you know, this is what fate is like, this is how the world, you know, a well-ordered version of the Confucian patriarchal world. It's actually I take it and destroy it, and that's Ju's sort of purpose as a character. As to whether fate is real, like I get to leave it a bit fuzzy, right?
Who's
it's
to say?
What the characters believe.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in the Confucian patriarchy, as you say, if, you know, fate were let to play out, those with inherently more power, i.e. men, would, be the ones to continue to hold that power. And she was just like, fuck all y'all, like, I'm going to take this for myself. But doing it through a sort of deception, to trick fate and make fate think that this is who she really is.
Like, history is written by the men, right? I was like thinking about that as I wrote this book. Like, there was a female empress, and her story was written by the men who came after, and it left an extremely unflattering impression. So they kind of did remake the world as they wanted it to be.
Yeah.
So,
well, history written by men no more. So my next question is having to do with another theme, intertwined with fate, but one that is, dispersed throughout the novel. And that's that concept of greatness versus nothingness. So Chu believes she is destined for nothingness, so she claims her brother's destiny for greatness. Yet in the beginning, all she says is she desires to survive. So my question for you is, greatness to Chu, I think in the beginning is, that survival, that making it out of where she came from, but then it turns into so much more. What is greatness versus nothingness, and why can't there be something in between?
these questions are so funny. I'm such a new author, right? So it's always like, talk about your book. Here's an essay question from my university days, and that has been a very long time ago, and I'm not like a critical thinker when it comes to literature. I tend to just like, I'm just like
reaction to whatever, not expecting like nothing.
I know, but I'm just like, I write in a very unquestioned way, and like an unthinking way. I try and just like lay it out, the emotions, while I'm not really thinking about the broader picture sometimes. Like, I guess it's there, especially when you go round and around, you're like, oh, this is what the theme is.
Yeah.
Greatness and nothingness. Yeah. Well, I did want to write a book that was about ambition, of the non-male kind of ambition. I don't want to say female. Like, I feel like she was not a woman. Like, I wanted her to be non-binary, definitely, or genderqueer or gender fluid. So I kind of slightly resist the whole female ambition like side of things. I wanted to make her relatable. So I had a lot of goes at this character, and she was very hard to find. Initially I'd conceived as someone who was much more sociopathic, and like almost like they had a void inside. And I found that interesting. Like, I do like quite a sociopathic character. I like a Hannibal type character. But I felt like she had to be more humanized, more relatable in a way. And I find that whole being told you're nothing, and then the rise to power to being the everything, is like just very satisfying to me. I think anyone who's had the experience of being a minority, like any kind of minority or a disprivileged, unpowered person, I wanted to write a fantasy of ultimate power. I'm not necessarily like condoning that, but I find it very cathartic. And fantasy, like romance, is a place for like cathartic emotions. And so I wanted to make her as low as possible, and then have her unapologetically, in a way, like be the most powerful person and say, you all bow down to me and I'll put my foot on your head. And I'm just like, fuck yeah. It was pleasing to me. She could have stopped along the way. And there are several points at which, because she had framed it as, I only wanted to survive at first. If that had truly been the case, there are definitely several points she could have stopped. Mm-hmm. But then it became more, and she started to think, I want to be the emperor. So I guess at some point it transitioned from, purely wanting to survive to something better, like, I will be the best and I'll show you all. And people ask me, why did she have to take that final step at the end, which is almost that villain move of turning away from pure survival to pure ambition. I think book 2 is about the consequences of that decision. I think we go a lot more into why do you need to be the emperor particularly? What does it mean for you to have that ambition? What does it mean for you to sit on the throne? And are you actually willing to pay the price, the true price? Like Jude didn't really, she thinks she paid a price for, like, in terms of suffering for what she achieved, but I don't think she has yet.
Yeah.
I don't think she even realizes that she's never truly failed at anything. And when you write a coming of age story, sometimes like the true coming of age is having tried something and then royally failed at it. And she's really only had victories so far. Ma is that voice of compassion in the book, and I wanted, like, historically, that character, that figure, that historical figure was the one who held Zhu Yuanzhang back from his worst excesses. And well, they could have been worse. They were still pretty bad. So I think Ju is a better person for having Ma in her life. So she could have been worse.
I loved reading the progression of their relationship from like the hands brushing to like the beginning of chapter 21. It like escalated very quickly. And I was here for it. And I love what you were saying about like that turn from survival to ultimate ambition, and bringing a kind of very American comparison. It kind of reminds me of she became this kind of anti-hero where I was rooting for her because she was this woman like in a man's world saying fuck you to all of the men in power. And it kind of reminds me of like female politicians and female CEOs in America, like the kind of girl boss energy where they're like going to the top of whatever industry they're in, but they're doing all of the same evils that the men in that power was doing. So like what's really changing here besides like the presentation of the individual? So that you just had me reminded me of that.
No, I was thinking about that because I worked a very military adjacent part of foreign affairs, let's say, and I definitely, it was like women were not permitted to become ambassadors in Australia until like the 60s or 70s. It was shockingly late, actually. And I had some female bosses who were I have gotten here by being as badass as I can, and I'm not going to put down the ladder for anyone, for any other women, actually. And I could understand why they were like that, but it was the most horrific thing, like, to experience as a younger, like, AFAB person in that industry. And what's interesting, what I wanted to do with Ju is actually show her in the company of women, a bit, at least. So there are some other women, and she kind of puts down a hand. Even though she's not really a woman herself, she can kind of be sympathetic to what they've been through and just be like, hey, actually, there's some options for you. Let me help you up a little bit.
Yeah, with the I forget the name of the town, but she goes in there and makes I don't know if it's mayor or like the head of the town, and that whole interaction between them where it's like, no, you can have greater ambition than what you think is possible for you, and here's how. Absolutely loved that. So who, oh wait, no, my next question is, in the beginning we just know Chu as, or pronouncing it differently, is it Chu?
Which one?
Ju, ZHU.
Yeah, Ju. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we were talking about this in our discussion earlier. We met noon my time, just having a general book discussion about She Who Became the Sun. And one of the questions that came up is, what's her name? Because she adopts her brother's name for so much of the book and then chooses a name of her own in the end, or takes back her birth name. Was she given a name at birth? Do you have an answer there for us?
She doesn't have a name. Well, she did in earlier drafts, and it's not a very interesting name. And it became immediately much more interesting, I think, for her to start in this mythic place as just the girl. And in a sense, in a way, back in the olden days, even not in the super, super olden days, like, girls in Chinese families were often just numbered. The second daughter, the third daughter, whatever. Like, even to this day, like, I don't in my family, my like, I'm gonna say like my grandparents' generation, I don't call them, I don't even know their names. They're just like eighth auntie, seventh auntie, whatever. Like the birth order in your family is important. It like helps order the world. But to be called second daughter, I guess like that is a name in a sense, but also it's not as great of a name as the boys might get, which are a bit more individual and that often carry like certain some naming schemes were like there'd be sort of a poem that each family would have, and you take a syllable from that poem and name your kids, so they all kind of like lined up together that like make that poem. So the girls weren't included in that necessarily. So she doesn't have a name, so she's just like the girl.
Yeah.
And she takes her brother's name, and then at the end she takes what I think of as like her true name and her chosen name, and the meaning of that name is, to paraphrase, kind of like the death of the yuan, I'm going to be your gravestone kind of thing. It's kind of
wow. I didn't even realize that when I read the ending.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't belabor it. I guess it's sort of an Easter egg. If you know Chinese and you know that person, that is what their name means. But it's slightly more complicated because in Chinese you have, like, as you'll know from watching The Untamed and Word of Honor and stuff like that, people have many different names.
Yes.
They have their regular name that is their name, then the name that people call them as a courtesy. Like, you don't often call people by their like normal name straight up. It's pretty rude. And often their courtesy name and your normal name together, when put together, will add nuance to the meaning as well. And so this character's name, the Hongwu Emperor, his like courtesy name was very like nationalistic. And when put together with his the name he chose for himself, it's all very like grandiose and like, I will bring down the Mongols and I will rule.
Exactly. Amazing.
Yeah. But he did choose his name.
Okay, good to know. So Zhu and Ouyang are both described by the other characters in the novel as neither male, neither female, something entirely in between. And you're describing Zhu as gender fluid, gender queer, non-binary. And I'm wondering, how do you think these characters see themselves in their own gender identity outside of what other people are assigning to them?
I mean, it's hard to, when you're writing a historical, like one of the joys of writing a fantasy historical, I mean, although this is set in like ostensibly the real world, it is a fantasy and it does not really bear that much resemblance to the actual gender politics of 14th century China. But one of the joys of writing in that like sandbox is that you don't have to put a label on people. So you can really just describe feelings, you can describe behaviors without having to say like this person is gay, this person is bisexual, this person is, gender fluid. Like I use those words. Like Ju's journey is towards a understanding of the power of gender fluidity, I would have said, in that, she spent a lot of time saying I have to be male and denying every connection back to that female beginning, her female socialization as a girl, and seeing only a weakness in that. But what I wanted to portray, I suppose, was a more expansive gender identity that she could have, which includes those female beginnings, understandings of, people who are of the female gender, which she herself doesn't feel a part of, but like has a kinship, sort of like some kind of shared history, which I suppose, like myself, I think of myself as non-binary, but I was raised as a girl. I'm an AFAB, obviously. That gives me a sort of political solidarity with people who continue to identify as female. And a lot of like those rights that I will continue to fight for, even if I don't identify as female myself. So I kind of wanted you to have that. I didn't want a misogynistic trans identity for her. I wanted it to be an inclusive. And that thing that she always thought of as a weakness is in fact a strength. She can see the world from all these perspectives that other people can't.
Yeah.
So I think she thinks of herself as in between. Like, I don't know what word she would use for it particularly.
Yeah.
And the idea that she's not a man, I think, is very important to her. Like, she will, no matter what happens in book 2, she will be a different kind of emperor from the historical figure who was a cis man and exemplifies all the horrors that are often inherent in like cis men gaining power over the world. And like Ouyang is like, he is the misogynistic trans figure, the self-hate. Like, I mean, he's had a hard life. He did not ask to have his gender stripped away from him and like have his masculinity denied at every turn, and that has shaped him into a very unfortunate place that I am, in a sense, as the author, very sympathetic to. I mean, he is awful. He has a lot more agency than he realizes. Like, I think he does take the victim role quite a lot, and he is a villain in a way, but I have sympathy for him. To have your gender denied to your face constantly, to be misgendered, to be told that you're like a thing, that comes from a place in me as well. So someone described him as an AFAB trans man. Oh no, an AMAB trans man. And I'm like, yeah, that is kind of what he is.
Yeah. But his misogyny is ultimately a weakness, because how he attempts to defeat Ju is by cutting off her hand. And he's like, this is the greatest suffering that you can ever experience. It's worse than death. And it frees her, and it ultimately becomes part of an advantage for her rise to power.
Like, he clings to his toxic masculinity because he's been denied his masculinity, and he doesn't see that he would actually be freer if he could let go of that. But I guess he can't. And like, I have some sympathy. It's very hard to like step outside and to sort of let go of what has been important to you, what has been a pillar of your identity. So.
Absolutely. So we have a extension of Sapph-Lit, which is rather new. It's called Sapph-Lit Writers. And Kenzie created that new home in our little Geneva app where we host our book club. And I would love for you to share any words of wisdom for future writers of Sapph-Lit. As someone who just released their debut novel, do you have any advice, tips, tricks, anything that you wish you would have heard when you were beginning this process yourself?
It's so bold to assume I have the advice because I am, as you said, new to this whole business. The best advice I ever received from someone who's one of my writing heroes, who actually is C.S. Pacat, whose book is up here. I'm trying to point. Captive Prince was one of my biggest inspirations. It is a gay fantasy romance, spectacular. Anyway, the best advice I ever got was from C.S. Pacat, who said, don't write what you think you should write. Don't write what you think will impress other people. This is the stage where it's like, I'm going to write a short story that will be published in the New Yorker. I'm going to write a great work of literature. I want to win the Pulitzer Prize. C.S. Pacat was like, hold up, just write what you want to write. And I was like, oh, I really like romance, and I really like, tragic romance and fantasy and tropes. And she was just like, write the book of your heart. The heart wants what it wants. It will still be good, because you're interested in it, because it's what stirs you. If you write out of obligation, it's just going to be shit. It's just going to be dry. Like, put your truth in it, put your heart in it. Write something that you're actually truly passionate about. And that was the best advice that I ever got, because I wrote this book and I probably would never have finished anything else. So
I absolutely love that. That was definitely something that I heard when I did a master class on creative writing. And that was one of the final like nuggets that they had, where it's like, no one wants to read what you think they want to read. There's so much, like, the specificity in what you love will give you a wider reading audience than you think. Yeah. So we're on to the rapid fire round. These are just like short little questions. First thing that comes to mind. So what are you currently reading?
I really love nonfiction. So I'm reading, it's called Dirty Work by Isle Press. And it's about, sorry, is this too long?
Okay.
Do I say what the book is? How privileged people push the amoral work of society to the lowest privileged people, like slaughterhouses, drone warfare, and psychiatric care in prisons. It's really interesting.
I mean, that's not wrong. So did you take up a unusual quarantine activity like baking bread, knitting, starting a book club?
We got a dog. I am not a dog person, and I've resisted through 6 lockdowns. I've resisted the idea of a pet, but I finally cracked. So now I'm a dog owner, and it's quite interesting.
What kind of dog and what's their name?
We got a greyhound, and his name is Ezra, and he's orange.
Bless him. I love greyhounds. Do you have a favorite feminist retelling of mythology or history?
Circe by Madeline Miller. It's a masterpiece. She leveled up like, wow, it's so good.
Completely agree. That is definitely a 5-star read for the ages for me. Okay, if you could have a dinner with anyone dead or alive, who would it be?
Wow, the first thing that popped into my head was Octavia Butler for some reason, which is really weird because I've only read one of her books, but man, I want to know how her brain works.
That's a great answer. I love that. Favorite queer movie?
Oh. Favorite. I want to say something that's happy. No. I know I love Wong Kar-wai, Happy Together with Tony Leung, maybe. That's not happy, but yeah, okay, I'll just say that.
Do you have a favorite queer TV show?
It's really hard for me to answer these because I project so much queerness into everything I watch. Hannibal. Yeah, I'm gonna say that.
I mean, I'm
queer.
sure
It is queer.
like, yeah, absolutely. You can make anything queer if you try hard enough. And then last rapid fire question, do you have a favorite queer musician, like any queer music that you love listening to?
I really liked Sophie, who passed away. So this year, time has no meaning. Maybe last year. That was really sad. To have a young, beautiful trans, figure taken away from us so early. But
yeah, no, I loved her music so much. Yeah, that was very sad, but great answer. Absolutely. Her music slaps. And now we can move on into community questions. So these were taken over the last month in our Geneva discussions room. And if anyone else has questions for Shelley while we're on the call, you can put them in the chat box and I'll ask them at the end. But the first question we have is from Allie. And can you talk about the importance of names and how people see themselves in the book? Some people are referred to their family name versus their full name versus their first name or no name at all. And so a great example of this is Chu refers to herself as this monk for a long time. And the moment that she says I is a really big moment between her and Ma. So curious about these choices that you made.
Oh, thanks, Ellie, for your question. Some of this is linguistic and some of this is cultural and some of this is just, I'm going to say, the terrible prosaics of publishing. So to start with the example, I guess it's the style to refer to yourself humbly in third person, and Chinese has a lot of different pronouns, and actually to be a monk you have a monkly pronoun, and to be the emperor there's a particular pronoun that the emperor only uses. And it's always a really powerful moment in Chinese dramas when someone becomes the emperor and for the first time refers to themselves with the emperor first person pronoun. And conversely, kind of cool when an emperor slips and refers to himself with a regular first person pronoun, and then you're aware like, oh, they're a person after all, not just an emperor. So it's a really powerful way of conveying where you are in society. And what I found fun to play with is that Ju, being a trickster kind of character, loves to live behind this very humble, monkly persona, and that includes her pronoun, which I convey in English as, this monk. People would often say, oh, people would refer to themselves as like, oh, this servant, this humble official, this woman, stuff like that. And using that doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually being polite or ambitious, that you're not ambitious, that you don't have like devious means. It's all like a superficial cover, and like the truth is happening somewhere beneath the surface. And it's always kind of fun to think about, oh, this person is like this humble official, like advises the emperor such and such, and you're not being humble at all, and you're actually giving your like very like concerned advice to the emperor. In fact, you're telling the emperor what to do right now. So you can like read all the nuances into that. It's really fun in Chinese
a reminder
dramas.
of your position to the person that you're speaking to. It's like, this is my authority.
Yeah.
Like, don't question me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ali had oh no, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna say, like, some of the names, like Ouyang does not have a first name because he just represents his family, and like Ju didn't have a name at the start, so like that was for a particular purpose. So we never find out Ouyang's first name.
Yeah, that was the first time I realized we never find out his first name. I mean, all of the ghosts were following him around, so he really was representing his whole family in the end. So Ali's second question is, both Essen and Ma have pure hearts. Because of this, their wants seem to get overridden by the stronger desires of those people around them. Do you see purity and open-heartedness in direct conflict with desire?
Purity and open-heartedness. I think I've always thought of Ma as the strongest character in the book. But it's not because she doesn't desire, it's because she has that compassion, and I think that vulnerability. No, I think you can be, I would like to think that you can be pure and open-hearted and still desire things. For instance, like you can desire a goodness in the world. I think that'd be a wonderful thing to want. I'm not sure any of my characters, it's very hard for me to project into that mentality because I don't. I tend to write an anti-hero, but I think I would like to read. I think like Becky Chambers, for instance, writes a lot of people who are very open-hearted and wonderful and desire goodness and work very hard to make that happen in the world. So I don't think they're opposite. Yeah, Essen has his blind spots. I think he's actually secretly the worst person in the book. I'm going to be honest with you.
Ooh,
just a big call. I always say that everyone gets what they deserved, and like he is that guy who lives in, like, he thinks of himself as a good person, and I think his society thinks of him as a good person, but he is very wrapped up in his own privilege to the point of excluding everyone else, and he's very blind to it all, and that leads to his downfall.
Yeah. I have to admit, this is going off script here, I was very upset he and Ouyang never fucked. Just full transparency. I was expecting it. I was wanting it. It was the hands brushing. It was the touching of the face. And I was just like, bro, like, are we about to kiss right now? Did it ever cross your mind to make them lovers, or you were like, nope, never?
In accordance with the I feel like the rules of the genre prohibit it, because it is that tragic romance kind of structure. I almost felt like in its purest form they could not, like, I am all for the fucking, as you know, I'm all for sex scenes. I'm a romance author at heart. Yeah. So did someone just make the gesture at me? Yeah. So if there had been a way, I would have, but I really felt like there was a sense of like narrative purity I wanted to maintain, which is that, in Chinese dramas, the most romantic moment is when, like, their eyes might meet once, and then they're like, just because of that, we know we are forever, this is the most romantic moment, and then they die. They're literally never touched.
No, you're so
I wanted to
the bare minimum suddenly becomes like the most romantic thing, which is in such contrast to like so much Western media where the bare minimum is like just the start of something rather than the end. His Essen's death was, I was just like screaming when I was reading it. It was so dramatic and I loved it, which is weird to say about death that you loved it, but oh my gosh, it was so.
I also loved it. That was the moment why I wrote the whole book. I was just like, yeah.
So Anathea has a question for you. What were your other ideas for how Ma, Enshu, Essen, and Uyong's storylines and relationships would unfold? Were you always sure of how you wanted things to go for them? Yeah, and this was basically perfect leading into my tangent with how their Essen and Uyong's relationship ended up.
I always had a strong personal sense of where they would go, because I'm playing with classic tropes and classic like story shapes. Like, yeah, that, as I said before, the Chinese tragic romance like starts and ends in a particular way, and you can subvert these things. I mean, definitely there are things I subverted. Yeah, the end of book 2 for sure, I felt is inevitable. And definitely someone in my critique group was like, it doesn't have to end this way. You are the author, you can change it, you can do what you like. And I'm just like, no, it has to be like this. This is the way the story goes. For a particular character who I will not name because it's a giant spoiler. Yeah, I am someone, I guess the plot is always quite fixed. No matter how many drafts I do, the characters will change, but like their ultimate endpoints won't. And I think that's because I'm maybe a fanfic person or writing history fanfic or something. I kind of know where everyone's going to end up, and it's just playing within the lines of like established history. So I always knew that Ma and Ju are going to end up together. And that's why it's not like a proper romance. It's more, I didn't do the full slow burn for them. I didn't do a big romance. Like in a way, you kind of know who they're going to be. And you kind of know Ju is going to be the emperor. It's not a spoiler.
Yeah. No, so when I picked up this book, I was very ignorant in the origin story of the retelling. And I was doing a lot of Wikipedia searches after the fact where I was like, wait, what? When the ending happened. So I'm very excited to see how the second installment plays out. So we have a few more community questions and then we can get to the questions in the chat. So Clem has a very interesting question about the monastery and the practices of the monastery. So how the Buddha's Four Noble Truths inspired the characters and their journey. They notice some Buddhist accents to the characters. For example, how Chu exploits people's desires because everyone is a slave of their desires in the end.
Yeah, I wonder if the book is a bit of a critique of the Buddhist beliefs as well as Confucian beliefs. I mean, it's all kind of mingled together in Chinese culture. It's a very, I'm not a student of Chinese history and philosophy, so I cannot speak as specifically to this as like some other authors would be able to. I only know it through living it, and you don't know which bits came from what. Yeah. Like the Cantonese, Chinese, Malaysian culture I grew up in is like very superstitious, and there are bits that are Buddhist and there are bits that are not. But yeah, this whole idea of the self-abnegation and the suppression of bodily desires was really interesting to me. And I wanted to play with that. So Ju is a Buddhist monk, and the Buddhists, like in certain practices of Buddhist religion, as a religion as opposed to a more broad spiritual practice, it's very deny the body, deny your desires, no attachment. And like just as a queer person whose desires are often not acknowledged by society, not allowed within your culture, it feels a bit weird to me. Like, I kind of want to celebrate the body. I want to celebrate desire and allow it to be expressed in the world. And it causes pain, sure. You have to make yourself vulnerable. I personally, I think there's like such a beauty in acknowledging one's like animal desires, and allowing people to express themselves. And I feel this tension between like the Buddhist and the queer in a way. So yeah, I was playing with that, and I guess Jew in the end is a bit of a like, screw you, I'm going to go all in on my current existence. I'm going to live my life, I'm going to love, I'm going to express my queerness, and so be it. If the religion condemns me, if I have to sacrifice my future lives or whatever, that is the price I'm willing to pay.
Yeah, I love that. So we have 3 questions in the chat for you. Alicia asks, do you have a favorite character or favorite perspective that you wrote?
I do have a favorite character, and he does not have a perspective yet. He is a big character in book 2. His name is Wang Baoxiang. And, he's the bitter scholar who's just like, I just want to be really good at like being an accountant, being a, administrator. And everyone's like running around causing war and not, don't you see the empire is going to fall down? He really loves art, and he loves the beautiful things in life. And he's just really been, no one acknowledges that these are valid things, that his masculinity is also.
Is that not Essen's brother?
Yeah. This is Essen's brother.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's very bitter that in this culture that he's in, no one recognizes his strengths, which are actually, had he been born like several hundred years earlier, he would be held up as the pinnacle of masculinity.
Yeah. No, it's all about the time that you're born in and how society perceives you. I thought he was such an interesting character because he was so conniving, and how he planned the demise of Ma's then fiance with the killing of the cheetah. Oh my gosh, when that happened, I was like like sharp intake of breath. Before we get into the other community questions, can you tell us a bit more about the second book in the duology and any details that you can share, because you have brought it up several times?
That's it. Well, it's on my mind because I'm writing it right now. That's why. And if I had been smart, I would have finished writing it before book 1 came out, which would have been the ideal place to be. But pandemic happened, so we're a little behind schedule. Yeah, book 2 is all about consequences. It's about like grief and loss and ghosts and coming to terms with what you've done. But it's also the final battle for the throne. So at the end of book 1, Drew has not gotten to the capital. So now we actually have several people who are all vying for the throne, some of which are known to each other and some of which are not.
Yeah.
And I guess there are 3 main contenders, where there are 3 points of view. And I like to say that there's Jew who's vying for the throne, and then there's a man and a woman who are going to be her big opponents.
Oh, I'm so excited. Yeah, that will definitely be a Sapph-Lit contender for the fiction pick, I'm sure. Yeah, when the ending happened, I didn't know it was a duology, and I was like, that's it? What? But no, thank the heavens, there is more to come. So Gabby asks, if you could give the book a soundtrack or make a playlist for it, what music would be on it? I listened to the Spirited Away soundtrack and the Game of Thrones soundtrack while reading it.
Some people have made some beautiful like Chinese drama type playlists that I think are on Spotify. I personally only listen to cheesy, terrible music as I write. I have like incredibly pedestrian music tastes, and it's a lot of top 40. some like instrumental stuff. I don't know what, I'm not sure what goes with the book. Yeah, so
Yeah.
probably you're better off consulting the internet for the playlists.
Yeah, Samantha Shannon made a playlist for the Priory of the Orange Tree, and I listened to that playlist a lot while reading She Who Became the Sun. And there's one track on it that is just so perfect to listen to while battle scenes are happening. And I don't know the name of the song. I just know the album cover, and I will click on it when the battle starts. And for some reason, whatever battle it is, the climax of the song always happens at the climax of the battle. And it's just, oh, it's so satisfying. But I can't listen to any like words when I'm reading or writing. It has to be like purely instrumental. But yeah, no, I will definitely look up some of those playlists when reading the second one as well. And the last question that we have is from Anathea. So everyone who possessed the mandate of heaven had a different colored flame. Was there a reasoning behind the color of each person? So Zhu and the Prince of Radiances were explained a bit, but what was your intention behind that?
Sigh, epic sigh. You know, I said this in quite a few places, but this book was not originally a fantasy. It was a straight up Chinese drama with no magic in it.
Oh.
And it's the whole thing about the Chinese drama genre is that it is told in a very like fantasy register. It has those heightened emotions, the cathartic nature of it. It's not realism in any sense of the word. And it has a lot of similarities to like Regency romance in the sense that, you know, it's ostensibly set in the Regency period or in the past, but it's really just a shared sandbox of tropes and characters that authors will sort of know the conventions and like play with that. So that's what this book originally was. Didn't have any magic. And then I did sell it to a fantasy imprint because they really understood what I was going for, you know, the queerness and the big emotions, and they grooved with that. I'm like, that's great. But then they were like, oh, it's a bit hard to place in the market if it doesn't have magic. So please add some magic. And so I was like, okay, let's just make everything that people believed, just make it real, make it explicit, so that's why we have ghosts as an actual thing. In the early drafts, you know, people believed the ghosts were there, but you never saw them, just because, you know, the supernatural is very close to the skin of the world in Chinese beliefs, Chinese culture. You know, the ancestors are there watching you. So we had the ghosts and then the mandate. So people believe that the emperor did have the mandate of heaven, and I made it a literal visual representation of someone who had the potential to take the throne. And it's really just based on their belief. If they believe it enough, you know, they will have it. Doesn't mean they'll get there in the end. I don't think so. Not necessarily, because several people have it. The colors are based on historical battle flags. For instance, the Yuan dynasties was blue. The Red Turban Rebellion, red is a very like, you know, fortuitous color in Chinese culture. White, like the pure radiance that Zhu has, which is the white color or no color. I mean, because the Ming dynasty, Ming means bright. So it's just that sort of call back to her dynasty that she will found, that is pure brightness of the sun. And there are some other colors. The Salt Empire of Madame Zhang has orange. I don't know why. I think because salt burns orange. I can't remember. There are a few other colors that will turn up. And so someone will end up having a, this is a spoiler. I'm just going to say there is another major character who has the mandate as well. Actually, it's hinted at in book 1, but you'll see it in full in book 2. He has the mandate, and it is a particular color that actually does have a meaning.
Oh, that's exciting. My last question is, oh my gosh, I just had a brain fart and I lost it. It's nighttime here. I'm gonna give up on that one, and I will just DM you on Instagram if it comes back. But oh, the hour is up. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your morning, my night, someone else's daytime, I'm sure, to chat with us. I really just enjoyed getting to know you better and hearing your process behind writing the book. So yeah, just thank you so much. And everyone in the chat can say thank you as well and give up those little reactions that Zoom gave us with the little claps, the little hearts, throw out some love to Shelley. Yeah, no, I just really appreciate you taking the time for our little book club to chat with us.
Thank you so much. And your questions are really good. I'm sorry, I couldn't do them justice. I really felt like, oh, these are way above my pay grade. I have not thought deeply about any of these things. So thank you for putting up with me. Thank you for reading my book.
No, I so enjoy an author who's just like so down to earth and so like, I don't fucking know how to write or how to, I can do it. I think those are like the books that I enjoy to read the most because they're so real, down to earth, just like the author that writes them. So really appreciate your time, and I am so excited for the next book. Any idea on when it's going to come out? No pressure.
When I finish it. It's due this year sometime, so we'll see.
Beautiful.
How well I'm going.
Beautiful. Well, best of luck with that. And thank you everyone for joining. We'll go fangirl in Geneva and talk about the discussion there. So thank you so much, Shelley. Have a fantastic day.
Thank you so much. All right, take care.